Okay. I'm going to talk in English, and I understand German as well, and I speak German as well, but I just wanted to clarify that it's easier for me to actually convey this idea in English. But if you have any questions, please use Slider and ask questions, and we'll answer those afterwards. So basically, what I want to talk about is tokenizing the body first as a case study. That is a company that I founded a few years ago, and what we are doing, we're actually capturing biometric and environmental data from teenagers, and then contextualize that data and pay for the data with tokens. So completely cutting out the middleman. We are basically using this as a metaphor to then talk about actually creators or creative content that is created by Gen Z, so that is a term used now when we say creators. And in the context of esports and healthcare, the reason for that is because what we are building is we're creating biometric gamification that actually empowers the creation of games and gamifying the experience, and thus engaging Gen Z. So I'll give you a little bit of context what that all means. So I actually live in Lisbon in Vienna, so I switched from New York to Lisbon, so that's a little bit of a change. I have worked in the space of biometric data analytics for about 20 years, primarily in the sports sector. And you would want to call me also a body sensorist and a researcher in that space, as well as what we are creating is a think tank, and that is Moondial, that has worked with Intel, Johnson Controls, and so forth, particularly on exploring new ideas in the context of the body, in the context of sensing the body. And then SUPA is a company that I founded a few years ago, and with that also, of course, we're doing a lot of research. Currently, actually, I'm doing research at Interface Cultures. So what does tokenizing the body actually mean? So it basically means that we are taking data from the body, from teenagers, who willingly give us that data through different types of wearables or smart textiles. That data is aggregated, anonymized, so we are GDPR compliant. Then it will be contextualized for the information the stakeholders in sports and in healthcare are interested in. And we pay, in return, the teenagers with tokens. So you basically get paid for the data you're generating. We're making sure that there is wealth distribution by using your data that you generate. You get paid for that data. The contextualization adds value to the data and is then paid for. So it's actually a complete anti-advertising model per se. So when we talk about biometric gamification, and that is of course also very interesting for media companies we're working with, and also sports and experiential studios, is that we are creating gamified experience where you basically game with your body in the context of music, in the context of sports, particularly also on esports, and in the context of gaming per se. So in this case, basically using the body as a game controller for us means in esports something like this. You have the esports league, that is where you have a lot of, about up to 50,000 people watching different type of esports gaming, what I mean call leagues, to battle against each other, currently using typically a computer, different types of keyboards, whatever you want to call it, different types of game controllers. We, however, use now the body as a game controller. So instead of basically using a device, you use your body to game. So in this context, the reason why this is so interesting is esports per se is becoming a $2 billion industry over the next few years. So the actual industry itself is becoming really big. What does it have to do with the body? It has to do with the body in the sense of we want to make teenagers move in the context of gaming. So as you've seen before on the image, if you use a VR environment, for example, or another type of environment, an augmented reality environment, where you use the body and you play, and you use mobile computation, you actually get kids to engage outside of a typical home environment. So that is one. The same is used for sports. For example, we're using it for sports like surfing, where we also integrate different types of sensors and have the ability to actually gamify the surfing experience. And so over time, we actually gather very interesting insights about the actual physical behavior and different types of data points that are biometric and also environmental. Now, why environmental? Environmental for us is extremely important because it affords us to actually become a human sensor hub. So I know what is the pollution rate in this part of the city versus in this part of the city, but I can even do it by street. And now being a surfer, it's actually very interesting because every minute when the wind changes, it changes. When they actually open up the sewage canals, it changes. A lot of information is embedded by the sheer fact that we are actually as humans moving around. And that is highly valuable data. So what we are doing then, in this case, we did a pilot with Fila Sport, just to also make sure that there is a case study. And that was, if you were running for 500 miles, Fila was actually providing a sneaker to you, or a coupon for a sneaker to you. Now, we are using that information, say, hey, this is really something that brands want to engage in. This is really something the audience wants to engage in. But what are we doing now with GDPR, with actually distributing the wealth? So we actually said, let's build this entire, quote-unquote, incentivization model using tokens, and we are anonymizing the data generator by using blockchain. So what our core mission is, basically, we want to, through all that, democratize healthcare for teenagers. So who are the teenagers and why we're focusing on this, and particularly this audience? And I've heard a few conversations today already, what the focus of certain areas is, Gen Z versus other groups, streaming and so forth. So I just want to give you a little bit of context what I'm talking about when I talk about Gen Z. So for us at SUPA, it's 16 to 22-year-olds. In general, it's usually when you're born after 1996, 98. The cutoff is becoming a little bit fluid now. It's also very important that that population actually is 40% of the world within the next couple of years. So we have 2 billion people under the age of 22 over the next 2 years. Most of them, in terms of population, we have about 13% in the US and in Europe. The rest, however, and the largest populations are in areas like India, China, and Nigeria. So it's highly focused on these markets. Very importantly is also that you see a lot of studies and a lot of different types of experts talking about the fact that they're highly fiscally conservative. The reason for that is we got 2007, 2008, and it's almost inherent in the behavior that was experienced when you were a kid, how frantic your parents or the politics around you were. So that's a very interesting point as well when you say, hey, we want to pay you for the data you are generating, you providing us with data that is extremely valuable for society in order to actually make a change in the climate, make a change in healthcare, providing transparency, providing trust, and all of that is inherent in the behavior that we currently see and is currently very well exposed, just talking about Fridays for Future. But also what is very interesting is there is also high interest or high correlation between, yes, you are connected all the times, which I am as well. Don't take my phone away from me. But at the same time, there is also an escape from technology, meaning that we actually are willing, if there are great experiences that are physical, that take us outside of the realm of the digital, there is a fluidity between the digital and the physical. So this is also very important to understand how to build for that generation. So what about digital healthcare and Gen Z? And that's, again, a niche, and I want to focus on it as a case study. The digital healthcare industry, as we see here, is about a $500 billion industry in a few years. The mobile health industry right now is 57% of that. Now, everybody who has a mobile phone right now and uses digital healthcare or uses forms of digital healthcare is in that number of 57%, which will grow definitely over the next few years. So that ratio of really being able to use and understand mobile, understand the ability to actually carry information with you at all times becomes extremely important also when you talk about data, because you now as a data generator, you basically have data in your digital wallet, in your phone, and you make money with it. So it becomes a currency for you. It becomes highly valuable for you. So the other thing why it's very interesting is also the current statistic is about 1/3 is using some type of wearable technology. So again, I'm also referring this more to Gen Z knows how to connect devices because it is inherent. There is no 5-year or 6-year-old right now who might not or might be scared of plugging things in and out. Very differently to somebody who has grown up without the internet and anybody who has actually been online since '91 understands the fact that you still have a complete different notion of what data and digital communication is than somebody who has never been without the internet. I think it is very, very important that we understand that also in the context of creating new business models and tokenizing some of the content and basically providing platforms, quote unquote, that are not really platforms in the current sense, but platforms that are really just providing the ability to exchange the information. So what is creators content? Coming back now to why this is very interesting for us as a SUPA, but also for the industry that is in knowledge transfer. So you have a lot of platforms out there that is currently used by Gen Z. Some of them, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, LiveMe, Netflix, Reddit, Network, and so forth. Ye is actually a platform that is now set up in Berlin, et cetera, et cetera. So you have all these middlemen that are actually really there for social commerce. So here you have all video, of course, live streaming and so forth, micro-influencers, again, social commerce, mobile gaming, tokenization, the economy. So those are all different types of keywords and different types of phrases that are highly interesting for us to explore. And at the same time, you see these are being used and new content is created on the fly that has nothing to do with the current way or the old way of journalism. So the interesting part there is we all know about paywalls. Everybody understands what a paywall is. What is now a micropayment in the context of a paywall or in the context of content? So it allows us to actually now really target content that is created, and we pay for the content that somebody creates online, and we like that content, so we pay for it. We don't pay for all the content. We really channel our tokens to pay for the content we really are interested in. So again, this is very interesting model. If you look into some of the micropayment systems that are inherent right now on the African continent, you can learn a lot about micropayment systems and how they actually do work, particularly if you look at countries like Kenya and Nigeria. So what is interesting when you then now take a micropayment, and how much is a micropayment, or how much is the data actually worth? That's where the tokenization schemes are coming into play. That's basically the economics around a token, the value of a token. So there are a few different ways to actually understand value. And that could definitely be a value as a euro or a dollar, but it could also be intangible value. So what are you using the actual gain? What are you using the quote-unquote token for you are making through the data that you are generating? A lot of interesting aspects are not only cash per se, but also donations, but also any types of impact you can create through the product that you might want to engage with, or through the different events that you want to engage in. And what we basically also do at SUPA, we are actually creating now a model where your token becomes also a stake of the actual company. So you become a shareholder. So it's a completely different model, different business model of understanding how the value of data is actually now extrapolated, and not just for KPIs to understand how many people are engaging, but also there is much more in-depth content and in-depth data that if now I, as the data generator, are getting reimbursed for, or can use that data to receive a financial benefit from, or some other impact benefit, then I would be more willing and understanding. So it's a lot about transparency as well. And then we, again, as Gen Z, you hold that data in your digital wallet, and you basically can decide how often, to whom, and how you want to sell it. So again, what is a token? And I think there's a lot of talk about tokens, cryptocurrencies, bitcoins. There's a lot of confusion around that. Very, very simply put, a token for us is basically a value that data provides. And yes, there are security tokens that are a Bitcoin, for example, that are considered to be a currency. There are also utility tokens that can be actually reviewed or regarded as just like frequent flyer mile points. They don't have an actual value in terms of money that you can pay something for. And then you have other types of tokens, like an equity token, for example, that represents an actual share of your company. So again, this is just simplifying some of the tokens that are out there. But again, you need to be very careful when you create tokenization schemes that they are not becoming obscure, but they're becoming very simple. So that's also something that we're working on, and that's why the think tank that I also have created is so important, to get a lot of different feedback from a lot of different stakeholders to understand how to actually build a new tokenization model that actually is clear and simple and works. And yes, it is for, in our case, a age group that understands digital currencies and understands digital as it is another tool. So I think we need to be also very, very careful to not always talk about digital, because digital is everywhere. It's an old term. It's something that we don't even want to use anymore. So speaking of, there is a term called the digital wallet. So what does that mean? It's basically you hold all your data in a digital wallet, you hold all your crypto or all your tokens, whatever that might be, in a digital wallet. That's where the term came from. So we basically now saying, okay, all the data that you're generating, you have with you on your mobile phone, and you can do with it whatever you want. This is very, very important. Mobile to us it needs to be on mobile. So again, we're paying with tokens for the data. So you basically have a data token play that is extremely important to actually basically use those terms almost in sync. If you have first identified, of course, within the tokenization scheme, the actual value that the data that you're extrapolating has. So we distribute what we do is we do an asset distribution, what we call, we're creating the body being a new asset class within SUPA, but you can actually do that across. So basically the asset that you create is something that you can distribute. The asset being the actual value of the data. So again, just a little bit about GDPR, because this is very important, and I think there's a lot of talk about KPIs and data and using data, but still not being transparent to the end consumer, and still not really understanding what GDPR means. It's data ownership. It's being able to port, to the portability of data, the ability to be, the right to be forgotten if you have not agreed. There's a lot of different things that we now need to work into our new business models. In particular, I think what is great in Europe now is we can actually here create a new way of thinking about this type of business because of this law that came into effect last year. And yes, it is definitely painful for existing corporations and companies, but it is something that will empower a new generation of businesses, a new generation of models of inclusion, also financial inclusion. And as we very well see, the model that will be launched in California next year, early next year, is very similar to what GDPR actually provides. So we see that suddenly in this case, we have here in Europe a legislative, advantage in the sense of we actually already have something in place. Yes, it has a lot of faults. Yes, it needs to be, in some ways integrated into our existing infrastructure, but it's very important. So again, I just briefly talk about data storage. This is something which is also very important. That law or that information has been out for a long time. The data that is generated in Europe by European citizens needs to be stored in Europe. You have, of course, the data security part. So again, if you have a digital wallet, you have a private key, you are the only person that actually has access. And we have a lot of different layers as to how to make this also portable for you. The data needs to be anonymized, so it cannot be traced back to you other than when you agree. So again, there is this transparency and this trust issue. And very important for us, it's we really create a lifestyle data brand. So I think for every company out there that is now in the space of creating information, and wants to get paid for that information or wants to be a brand, whatever it is, needs to actually understand that data is also a product that needs to be branding. So for us, again, SUPA ethos has to do a lot with the fact that we are using GDPR as our frame. So again, no BS, be authentic, be trustworthy, and also create the ability to donate. So we work with the UNICEF Foundation, for example, also the Surfrider Foundation in New York, and now in Portugal. We're setting up relationships with a few different other companies out there. So if you have any questions, I think we'll be having a conversation now. Thank you.